Hello everybody, it's Tommy and welcome back to another speed build for the Disney Save. Today we're going to be working on a fan request from one of my patrons. This is an exclusive thing that I offer at the highest tier of my Patreon, and basically it allows people who are pledged to the Disney royalty tier to turn in a fan request, and this can be a once per world fan request. I do close them from time to time, just depending on how many requests I get and how big a world might be. So for Mount Komorebi, when that rolled around versus Forgotten Hollow, the world that we were in before, I had them closed for Forgotten Hollow. It was just a little bit too small to be taking any requests, and a lot of times I will work with patrons anyway to sort of work their ideas in, so it didn't necessarily matter for Forgotten Hollow, but we had a little bit more room for Mount Komorebi, so I did extend the offer at the beginning of starting the world, and I did get a couple of fan requests in, one of them being Oaken and the inclusion of Oaken in the trading post. I didn't really specify that that was a fan request. It was also something that had been widely discussed with a lot of different patrons, so it ended up working out that somebody really specifically wanted it, but it also was something we were already sort of intending to include anyway. But this one was a little bit different. So I had a patron ask me about including a home for Periwinkle from Tinkerbell and The Secret of the Wings. And I never even considered that that would be like a really great option. We have this beautiful winter world, and I was thinking basically Frozen. We also have like the Asian inspiration, so obviously doing Mulan was very easy to pick. But when he recommended Periwinkle and the inclusion of that, I got so excited because obviously I love fantasy builds. I love Tinkerbell. I love Peter Pan. And I'm not super familiar with all of the Tinkerbell movies. I've seen a few of them, this movie actually being one of them. But I did remember that Periwinkle is actually Tinkerbell's identical sibling. So that's really exciting because it means that when we get to create her, we get to relate her later on to Tinkerbell. So we're essentially going to be creating Tinkerbell a lot earlier in the save file than originally I had thought. And so I was kind of torn about how we were going to even really include a home for Perry because of the fact that so much of Mount Komorebi is very, very residential looking, and there's a lot of modern technology in the background. I have a hard time sometimes like putting fantasy related builds when the surrounding area doesn't really call for it. However, when we were doing research for the world, I discovered that there was actually quite a few hidden lots on the way up Mount Komorebi. And there was actually 3, which originally going in, I only thought there to be 1. So exciting news, because basically that means that all of a sudden I got 2 extra lots to decide what I was going to do with them. And it's on the way up Mount Komorebi. This is actually the first lot that you hit on the mountain excursion, which does mean that it's very small, but there's nothing in the surrounding area except the mountains and like the beautiful landscape. So it's the perfect sort of place to do a fantasy related build where it won't look so kind of crazy and jarring compared to the background. So we have this one. There's one more lot right before you get to the peak, and I won't spoil what that is actually going to be. And then we have the top of the mountain, which obviously I've been working up for a while, is definitely going to be Elsa's castle. And I'm actually going to be starting that today after I finish this voiceover. So I'm really excited to get going on that as well. And so essentially I ran into a few issues when trying to design this place. I rewatched Tinkerbell and The Secret of the Wings, and there are a few scenes from the movie that take place in the winter forest, which is obviously the inspiration for the build today. And I was looking for a house that was Perry's. One thing that the other Tinkerbell movies do is really show like a lot of the houses and the landscape and all of the stuff that goes on in the world. There's a lot of world building. And so it's really cool. Like you get to see Tinkerbell's home. And I was sort of annoyed because I wanted to obviously see Perry's home. If we could find like an actual house that I can recreate, that just makes things a ton easier for me. A recreation is always a little bit better than doing something out of my own head. Although I do enjoy like my custom builds, when it comes to characters that live in places and like have residences, I would rather just recreate what they actually live in so it really feels very Disney and very magical. And there's one scene in the movie where Tinkerbell and Perry are sort of hanging out in this mountain hanging cottage, ice cottage. And to me, when I watched the movie, it didn't really seem like that was Perry's home. I thought that they were just sort of camping in the mountains and like hanging out. And then I started to do this build on stream, and we were having a lot of complications with it. I was trying to do some things that were just making it very hard to do, like a lot of tool, a lot of things that required debug objects, and just not working out the way that I would have wanted them to. I had a lot of really great ideas and things that I had wanted for this build, but I couldn't really figure out how to make all of them work given the lot restriction, and also because we are so high up in the mountain, it is a little bit hard to get everything to not be covered in snow all the time, and it sort of like ruins the build in a way. But we wanted it here because it so calls for like the mountainside. Basically, I built an entire house on stream. It was of my own design. I had a lot of references from Pinterest, as is typical for me, but it didn't exactly come out how I wanted it to. No surprise. And so I ended stream, and I was talking with another patron about the possibility that the scene in the movie was actually taking place inside Peri's home, which I wasn't really convinced of. And I did some more research and found that it could be Peri's home. It's never really specified, but I decided to err on the side of caution, and instead of building something of my own design, on the chance that that actually is Peri's home, I should probably just build that. So I took this in an entirely different direction after stream ended. People who were there for stream are probably going to be very confused because I basically removed the general concept of the above ground floor and recreated a brand new home. So basically the biggest difference being I was more going for a pod-like fantasy ice cottage, and this is more of like a mountainside home. And if you see the references from the movie, and I do recommend that maybe you go and check some out. I try not to throw references into my speed builds for a few reasons, but there's basically this beautiful round ice home hanging off the side of the mountain. It has an archway in the front that sort of opens it up and exposes it to the elements. But one thing that we did create on stream that I really loved and I wanted to keep was the downstairs floor. So you'll notice that the video actually started out with us working in the basement, and I had an idea to create a snowflake shaped room and sort of keep it very simple and icy and glowy and have maybe like one bed in there, and that would be Peri's bedroom. And being that Peri is a fairy, and for the purposes of the save, for now, we will likely just make her a spellcaster, but for the purposes of the save, fairies would be able to sort of transport wherever they want to. They can likely fly. They don't really need stairs. They don't really need ladders. When you come to this lot from doing the mountain excursion, you will have to teleport your sim to the upper floor to get to like that mountainside floor, which I think is a fun thing, because if you don't know how to do that by chance, then you kind of don't have access to it. But maybe if you are a spellcaster, maybe you do have like flight capabilities, you can get up there, or you can take the easy way out like I did when I was testing this and teleport them up there. But if you know that there is a hidden room around the back of the mountain here, and there is an access point for any sim downstairs to that bottom snowflake room where we have the bed, that a lot of us were making jokes about, you know, what would you do in the bed? Who knows? But it's there, and for all intents and purposes, this is Peri's home. She just obviously will never be here because this is a hidden secret lot. You can't have a sim technically live and move in here, so no one will ever be here when you stumble upon this. It is just sort of part of the mountain excursion, but we will be creating Peri. She will live in Mount Komorebi, and you will hopefully see her running around as a townie, and you'll know that this is her home. Ultimately, I'm very happy with the different direction that I decided to take for this. I went into debug, I found all of the snowy escape rocks that they used to create the mountainside, matched up the rocks, matched up the trees, and created like an extra extension of the mountain and just sort of like leveled the house on top of the rocks. So it's sort of sitting or hovering right above the rock levels. And I think that it is sort of cool that if you've never seen any of my speed builds, and I always try to think about this from time to time, but there will inevitably be people who download the save file or stumble across it one day long after the save file is already completed that have never seen any of my builds, do not know like all of the hidden details of the save. And so I like to hide things, especially for these fantasy related lots. One that comes to mind that wasn't as fantasy related, but something that I did that was very similar to this in the past. There is a nightclub in Evergreen Harbor. Sorry, I almost forgot the name of it. In Evergreen Harbor, there's a nightclub based after Big Hero 6, and there is a hidden downstairs room that has no purpose other than just to look cool, but it spells out BH6. in the room shape. And there's some cloning machines down there. If you're like a high level scientist, you would be able to use those. But other than that, it's really just for aesthetics. And so I really liked the idea that there was like a hidden room underneath this part of the mountain that's this beautiful, crazy looking snowflake room with nothing in it but a bed. And then the upstairs portion, the actual home, is less of a home and more of just a recreation from the movie. So like I mentioned earlier, there is the scene where Tink and Perry are hanging out in here, and you can see in the background some of the elements that are going on. So rather than trying to fit like full living room, kitchen, dining, bathroom into this place, knowing that a sim doesn't technically live here and that when you stumble upon this place on the mountain excursion, you will probably be here for a very limited time. It's more just supposed to be like a fun thing that you run into. We don't really need to make this a fully functional house with like a kitchen and all of that. There are obviously little things that you could add here and there that would make it so that when you got here, if you wanted to grab a quick snack and stuff like that, you could add them in really quickly. I was just more focused on how can we make this a movie recreation. And so basically the house is a lot of different levels of ice. There are these like swirly ice bits that are holding up the ceiling portion or like swirling into the back walls of the cave. And then there's not much in the way of furniture. In fact, I've probably added a little bit more in here than is really shown. But basically there's one blue floating pod chair in the back that appears to be made of ice, as all of the furniture in this is. There is maybe some kind of a nook that has a bed on it, but because we already had the bed downstairs, I decided that we would just replace that with some sort of like a couch. And then in the scene, Tinkerbell and Perry are going through what their common interests are and sort of checking them off in a list if they have like the same like in like a given category. So they have this big ice block in the middle of the room that has all these check marks on it where they're like discussing that. So I wanted to just maybe give more reference to the actual movie and put stuff in there in here like that rather than clutter this place up. And obviously it's a very limited space and the addition of the platforms restricts movement a little bit. The other thing that was sort of important was that there be a fireplace in the center of this room because Tinkerbell is a warm weather fairy. She can't really stay in the winter world for very long. So Perry makes her a fire in the middle of the house and they sort of have it in the center of the room. So if nothing else, when you stumble upon this place through your playthrough, it will be a place where you can come in and warm up. I did combine a coffee table with the fireplace in the center of the room and it is functional, which sometimes that doesn't always work, but I managed to get a sim up here to playtest this and it is a functional room, which is really, really cool. I was definitely a little bit worried. Also, something that I should mention is that the rocks that I've used to create this cliffside are debug rocks. And with a lot of these like hidden items in the game, your sims sometimes don't register them as like actual objects, and so they will walk right through them. And you will notice that if your sim gets the prompt on their own to go like rest in the bed downstairs, they will just walk straight through the rocks and then go to the hidden room around the back. But I like the idea that maybe people don't know it's there and you would sort of like either stumble upon it that way and be like, where is this bed that my sim speaks of? Or you might go into build mode and then go to some of the lower levels and sort of look through and see or stumble upon it that way. And then of course there will be inevitably people who have no idea that it's there, which is sort of the fun of the entire thing anyway. Now when it comes to future Tinkerbell builds, and hopefully there will be like an inclusion of more Tinkerbell related builds. Like, of course, I would love to do an actual recreation of Tinkerbell's home. There are, I feel, more elements in the game that will make a Tinkerbell build a little bit easier. When it comes to doing these ice builds, we don't have as much stuff in the Build and Buy catalog that is dedicated to being able to do a build like this. Like no furniture necessarily that feels as though it's made out of ice. And so I just sort of have to match everything color wise. I did use a lot of the Realm of Magic stuff in here. It has a very whimsical element that obviously lines up very well with fairies, and so it sort of naturally meshes, and it comes in a lot of like pure crystal white colors with the sort of elegant swirliness of a lot of the furniture that fits really, really well into a build like this. But it would be so great, obviously, to have some furniture that was actually made of ice. And this does give you a little bit of a preview of what you can expect for Elsa's, although I will say, I believe because of the fact that this is like Tinkerbell and Periwinkle, and they sort of have that like collector cluttered mentality to them, I went a little bit more cluttered in here and colorful in a way than I probably will for Elsa's castle. There's going to be like a simplicity and an elegance to Elsa's castle that mimics a lot better of the room on the bottom floor than the actual upstairs portion here. In fact, some people had mentioned that the snowflake room really reminded them of Elsa, and I wanted to say that I feel like when I do Elsa's castle, I won't have a really great opportunity to do like a dedicated snowflake room like that. I will do lots of references to snowflakes, but there wasn't an opportunity I felt like to possibly do this again where I could really create like an entire room that was shaped like a snowflake. For Elsa's castle, the shape and size of everything is already sort of determined, and we're working on very limited parameters as far as the lot restriction goes. So I just wanted to make sure that we did it here while we had a chance to do something a little bit whimsical. And the snow and ice and snowflake element is obviously very important to this movie as well. So I felt like it fit just as well. If anything, it's a little bit bright in here and a little bit like glowy and over the top, which for the movie I do feel like is sort of appropriate. It's not what I would generally like design a place to look like at all, and especially with this giant island living archway, definitely not up my alley. It's actually very disappointing that all this time we still have not received another archway that takes up that larger slot of the side of the building like that. That's maybe a little bit less island living and a little bit more like modern or regular cut at that wall height and everything. Basically that exact archway, but take away some of the island living elements to it. I really hated the black that was running through it and all of that. So I was trying to find different archways that would fit there, but we ultimately ended up going with the island living one because of course we did. And so ultimately, there's not really a ton to do here, but I think it was cool for the aesthetics of it, and I really enjoyed doing this fan request. And I like the idea that basically we're going to be able to do Tinkerbell and Periwinkle very, very soon. In fact, the next video that you see should be the creative sim for Periwinkle, which I will be live on Thursday starting. So if you want to come hang out, this is supposed to go up on Wednesday. The following day, I will be live creating Periwinkle, and Tinkerbell and Peri are twins. So we'll basically be creating and I just can't get over how exciting that is to create one of my favorite characters finally and put her into the save essentially without actually creating her, but basically creating her. And for those of you who are going to ask, because I know that Tinkerbell is very exciting, I will get a couple of questions out of the way. I will be creating some of the other fairies from Pixie Hollow. In fact, most of the main ones have always been on my list of characters that are going to make it in. Somebody had requested that maybe we throw in some of the winter fairies as townies for this world, so that could potentially be an element that we do for townie creation at the end of Mount Komorebi. I'm definitely open to the idea of it. For now, all fairies that we create will have to be spellcasters until we hopefully get some kind of a fairy element added. Instead of just dressing all of my Sims that are fairies up in those fairy costumes that we get from the Halloween pack, it would get a little bit repetitive and sort of boring after a while. And so I feel like the good and best solution to do right now is just to make them spellcasters. And at the very worst, they end up being spellcasters at the end of the save. Or hopefully we get a few more occults and I'm allowed to transition them over and I'll re-upload them to the gallery and give them all of the appropriate fairy elements. And wouldn't it even just be better if we got some kind of like element related technique to fairies? And that was sort of like the difference between fairies and spellcasters, was that they are more like nature and element based, and then we can pick which elements they're into for each of the different fairy types. So yes, all of that stuff is in the works. I'm thinking about all of it. It's not 100% determined where they're actually going to live yet. We'll sort of figure it out as we go along the way, and I have a couple of ideas of things that we could potentially do with the group of them, but they will be included because I know people are definitely going to want to know and are going to ask me. Sorry this video was a little bit out of order today. I will try to get a little bit better about it, but adjusting to streaming and all of that has definitely caused me to have to change the way that I do things around here, and it's just going to take a little bit more time to adjust to all of that good stuff. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Stay tuned for the screenshots at the end where we were able to remove the awful seasons decorations that auto spawned on this lot for no reason, so you can get some proper screenshots, especially at night. I really think that this place is something super special. Let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below and what you are excited to see next in the Disney Save. Don't forget to follow me over on Twitch. I stream 3 times a week for The Sims and once on Friday for Variety Friday. Come hang out 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Give me a follow, turn notifications on so you know when I go live. If you would like to support the Disney Save on Patreon, you can do so by clicking the link in my description box down below or the one at the end of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Hit that little bell icon below to turn on post notifications so you can get updated every single time I post, and I will talk to you all in the next one.